Brofman, and welcome to Brooklyn Art Song Society's Song and Wine, our little web series where we discuss art song and drink wine. I'm joined today by Soprano Kristina Bachrach.
Hi.
We are going to discuss our upcoming concert this Thursday, November 6th at Barge Music, part 2 of our little journey through Les Six, which is featuring the works of Darius Milhaud. And Kristina here is going to be singing a rarely heard but pretty awesome song cycle called Alyssa, which is big. It's the whole second half of the program, so we're going to talk a little bit about Milhaud and all his fun music. So cheers.
Cheers.
You're also like the first white in like a long time.
Oh really? Well, you know, I was thinking about it at the time I was craving white, so.
But it's good.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
Where did you get it?
Just down the street.
Fabulous.
There's like a glut of like wine shops around here.
Oh, that's true.
Anyways, so let's talk a little bit about
Alyssa.
Oh, the score. We have the score right here.
Fresh off the press.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what Alyssa is.
So Alyssa was written in 1910. It turns out by Milhaud, 1913. So he was born in 1892, making him 21 years old. So rather early.
I didn't realize he was so young. I knew it was like an early work, but I didn't realize he was like.
And it was revised in 1930, but it was quite early. And it's based off of a book called La Porte étroite by André Gide.
He won the Nobel Prize for Literature, like early, like one of the first ones to win it.
The first ever.
Yeah, I mean, he might have been like the first French person to win it or something like that.
Anyways, it's about 35 to 40 minutes long. It's hardly performed, and he's setting the prose straight from the book, and so a lot of them are conversations pulled from the novel, and then series of, for example, there's a 10-minute piece towards the end, Les Lettres d'Alyssa, and it's excerpts from letters that she's written in the book, and then the very last movement is called Le Journal d'Alyssa, and so that's settings of bits of her journal, but effectively, it's the story of this girl, Alyssa, and Jérôme, who is her boyfriend, lover, cousin,
kissing cousin.
Yeah.
As they call them.
And sort of the way that their relationship develops from when they're young children through when she dies as a young adult. Slowly goes insane and dies. And it's she feels very conflicted about it. For one thing, she's a very devout Christian, and she's not sure if the best way to love him is to offer up their love sort of as a sacrifice to God, and thus not be together. And he says, well, no, it's holy, like love is holy. And so that's the story.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's a work that you're very clearly a character. It's not like there are songs that are just sort of like generally like about flowers or something. It's always with an internal monologue of a character, which even song cycles like Winterreise and Die Schöne Malerin, which tell some sort of story. There's lots of songs that are just like, hey, look at the brook, or like, hey, look at where this never leaves. Right,
you're either Alyssa or Jérôme.
Yeah, it never leaves their minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is kind of an interesting. But what did you find learning this work? What did you find with the interesting elements of it, the things that kind of interested you about it?
Well, I would say, for one thing, I think it's the first music of Milhaud I've ever sung. And I'm very much aware of the Chanson de Ronsard and things like this, and then, of course, the ballet music. And what was interesting to me is how much it is not like that, actually. He sort of creates sort of a harmonic world and creates like a palette of colors, and then takes the text, it seems, and sort of sets it within this, I wouldn't say limited, but it's very distinct. If I only knew a couple of songs from the cycle, I might hear another one and say, oh, that's clearly from the same cycle.
Yeah, it has its own. I feel like Milhaud there are composers who are extremely sort of aesthetically consistent, like a Bach or a Mozart, like from beginning to end, they kind of write, maybe they mature and write in a mature, but it's like the same voice, it's just, and Milhaud is not one of those composers. Milhaud is a composer who like wrote in 20 different voices. I think like all great composers, he has things where you can kind of tell it's him. It's never like confusing that it's you always know it's Milhaud, but he had a very eclectic. That became kind of like a 20th century thing to do.
Yes.
Be sort of an eclectic composer, not just be right from one style.
Absolutely. And I mean, what became rather distinctive was his use of jazz elements, polytonality, and we don't have any of that here.
This predates that.
Yeah.
Although I think you, at this concert you will get to hear it, because I think Chanson de Ronsard is very, has lots of jazz and bitonality in it. And well, certainly the third song cycle on this is the Poème Juif is almost exclusively bitonal. Every song has some kind of bitonality in it, without fail. And then Chanson de Ronsard. So this concert does sort of capture, I think, with these three song cycles, a lot of the eclecticism. So even though it's one composer throughout, it doesn't feel like you're just listening to sort of the same, something cut from the same cloth.
I agree. Knowing all three pieces now, they're very, I mean, you're not going to say, oh my gosh, is that the same composer, but they're very distinctive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Very distinct subject matter.
Yeah, and we played a little bit of this together, so I'm somewhat familiar.
That's right.
We did one of the sort of a 10-minute excerpt that was, we did the
Les Lettres dans
Lettres. Yeah, and so that's the only part I'm like super familiar with, even though when I was picking music I must have listened to the whole cycle. But it does have, I think, what I found interesting about it is it's because I think one of Milhaud's sort of additions to the art song repertoire is he got very interested in setting prose instead of poetry. Mm-hmm. And this is, usually you set poetry in art song mostly for the practical reason of it's in meter.
Yes.
And it has something that sort of naturally makes it.
Yes.
But this is not, and I think it affects the musical language in that it's, to me, it seems often very sort of parlando, very quasi-spoken. Does it feel that way when you sing it?
Absolutely, and it feels, I mean, the range is a lot more limited than in a lot of song cycles. There's some rather low stuff. Not a lot of high stuff, but it does sit in a more speaking register, and there are, like, where a person might breathe, or where a person hesitates. I mean, this is not exclusive to this cycle, but it does feel like declaiming the prose.
Yeah.
And it never feels
It almost
awkward.
feels, I was describing something, it almost seems like maybe not as codified, but like a French Sprechstimme, like something that like Perrault, Lunaire, or something like that.
I mean, definitely not quite so.
It's not as extreme, but it's that idea of mimicking speech.
Yes, absolutely.
And mimicking speech patterns more than trying to write melody.
Absolutely.
So if you listen...
However, I feel that French is spoken in such a way, it's such a language that has sort of a legato feeling built into it, and so it takes very well to music.
Which actually brings us to our next topic very well, of preparing French in general. How do you approach the French language? How is singing French different than singing German or Italian?
Okay, so I'm actually really lucky that from the age 5 on, I was in a public school that had a French immersion program, meaning 5 years old, going to kindergarten, and your teachers only speak in French to you. And so at that young age, you're a sponge, and 3 months in, you're speaking pretty fluent conversational French. And so for me, singing in French is always a thrill. I mean, singing in your native language, there's something really special about that. There's something, it's in your blood, and you're going to be incredibly intimate with the idiomatic portions of the language. And so for me, French is a close, it's not as familiar as English, but it's a close second, and it's something I grew up speaking. And getting to sing, 20th century, 19th century prose has been especially thrilling, because usually when I sing in French, I still have to go back to the dictionary and look up a couple of words.
Because it's sort of antiquated French, and it's the poetic version of any language is always kind of different than the actual, it's the equivalent of no one, reading Shakespeare. Yeah. You understand it because it's your language, but you have to look up formal words.
And you have to sort of work for it.
Yeah, and no one talks that way in real life. No one walks down the street saying "How art thou?" And,
you could, but we don't. And so I actually, when I first got the music and was going through the text, there were 5 words I had to look up. And so in that way, it feels I mean, it feels very organic for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was saying, the French has this sort of legato feeling, and you're always sort of going to the end of the line. But I think when the way that he sets it makes it, you don't even have to think about that.
Yeah.
It's very natural. Like you said, it's speech patterns, and with French, it's not so erratic as, say, Pierre Linaire.
Yeah. No, I find it interesting that the degree, I find there an inverse proportion in the ease with which I can follow as an accompanist German, and how German is often not the most eloquent language to sing, and often kind of just inherently works against what vocally is the easiest thing to do, and how French is a much easier language to sing, and it's, to me, it took me a much larger adjustment to get. Now I've done a lot of French music, but when I first started accompanying French music, I was just...
It's hard. And also, as someone who doesn't speak French, there's a big unlike German, there's a big difference of what you see on the page and what you hear.
Yeah, exactly. And then, especially because you don't pronounce last syllables and stuff like that. And I took French in high school, and my level of French is I have a 5-year-old student who just moved from Paris, and I can speak to her in French because she's 5. Yeah. And I'm about at that level. Sometimes, like, I pretty much have the vocabulary, so like that's why.
That's pretty good though.
But often when I'm accompanying, like, I hear language in a very different way as an accompanist than as like a speaker or an understander. Like, I have a very like weird one. It's like a completely sound-based understand. It's like I'm not really listening for like meaning. I understand the meaning because I've done the translation, or I've sat with it. But in the moment on stage, it's just like this syllable lines up with this note, and it's a very and the things I know about languages are sort of very specific to certain consonants or certain vowels are longer or involve a certain bit of delay in my part, or just balance issues. If you're singing certain syllables, they can't be heard if I'm playing too stuff like that. So I feel like I have a weird relationship to languages that's different than like how one speaks it. Which I don't think is a bad thing, at least for my profession of choice.
No, that's good.
But there is something cool about feeling like you're doing it, because like no matter how much you study like German, say, and you can be a brilliant person, you can totally understand, have perfect diction and all that. But there's something that will always not be there if you didn't, like, it's not the language you actually speak. Yeah. And like, which I think is always a challenge with art song, in that we're mostly doing music in foreign languages, and to convey, like, on one level, the same I think goes for an audience. Yeah. That they can speak French, they can understand French. If you're in America, unless they're actually French, there will always be some kind of, they'll have to look at the translation and do something.
There's always one degree of separation, at least.
Yeah, and I think that it's not, I don't even necessarily think that's a bad thing. I don't think even when people are listening to singing in their own language, do they understand on a word for word level the way that if you were speaking those words? Like, people just, because it's hard to understand even the language you speak being sung.
And I mean, that's why we have super titles for opera in English.
And I think people just, because, especially if it's a wordy, like, involved text, there's enough to, like, if you're just reading a poem, it's really hard to just understand what's going on in the poem. On site. And then you add a level of how the music relates to it, it's just,
it's a lot.
It's not, you can't do it. So I don't think you're supposed to experience it as, like, literally understanding what someone is saying. You're more just supposed to take in the general atmosphere, the general sense of how what people are saying relates to the music and the mood. Yeah,
and that's also why it can be a lifelong joy, because I mean, even pieces I've been singing for 10 years, every time I re-sing them, I learn something new or understand something a little differently. As an audience member too, not just as a performer.
And also I think that there's a lot, especially when you're setting something like this, where I think another reason, going back to, it's sort of related, why poetry is more naturally set to music is because it has a sort of built-in rhythm and meter. Right. Part of that is just a purely logistical thing of, a lot of times when you have prose, you have something that doesn't have a meter to it, you, as a composer, you end up having so many problems with just like putting the emphasis on the right syllable that it overwhelms, because it's actually one of the hardest things in composing, I think, that all these composers tell me
Yeah.
when they're writing art songs.
Prosody.
Yeah, it's just getting it to sound organic. Like, we take for granted, getting something to just sound like it's not, like it's coherent.
Yeah.
Like, you know, again, the emphasis on syllable is something that you just take for, you don't like go like, wow, they really nailed that.
Unless it's not there yet.
No, yeah, and then when the second it's not there, you know,
Yeah.
the second someone's singing like, you know, I love you, and like
Right.
it's like a weird emphasis, then
Right.
you immediately sort of takes you out of the zone. So
Yeah. So something they have to quietly do and make it seem effortless.
yeah. So there's a lot of challenge in that, and sort of kudos to Milhaud
Yeah.
to make. He found, I think, a lot of solutions, and experimented with a lot of solutions with prose writing,
Mhm.
that, you know, setting prose to music that I think a lot of other composers borrow to this day.
I think so too. Yeah.
Which is, I think, important. But so I think the last question I had for you is, if you had to pick one moment in the song cycle that's really special to you that you want to call attention to, what would that be?
That's a good question. Let me think.
I have my moment from the
I would
little
love
bit
to
that
know
I played.
your movement. Yeah.
I will tell you my moment
Okay. Well,
while you ponder.
Yeah.
I think my favorite moment is in R Set the Beach when we did the letters. There's that moment in the first one when it's sort of, the music is very sort of
stasis.
Yeah, it's very flat, sort of, yeah, like you said, it's not rangy. And then there's this one movement where she's sort of like out in the garden by herself,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden I open up.
Yeah.
I have a much larger dynamic. You have a high A,
Mhm.
and what are the words? You have right here. Merci mon Dieu, thank you God for this beautiful night.
For having made such a beautiful night.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly effective because the music is so flat
Mhm.
for so much time that it's almost like a minimalist effect that you make it's so the same for so long that when something changes it really, and if this was sort of like a more extroverted style of music, that one moment
It wouldn't be a moment. Yeah.
yeah, but that one moment, which actually at the end of the day is not like that extreme. It's
Yeah.
it's actually only marked mezzo forte,
Yeah.
but it's the loudest part in the entire
Yeah.
10-minute
10
set.
minutes. Yeah.
And it's just and it's also like the only part that I really have big chords, and I just think it's a really beautiful moment.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. And this isn't quite a moment, but at the very end we have Les Journaux d'Alissa, and it's her journals, and she's dying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never really clear what she's dying of. I think we're to assume that she's dying of a broken heart because she has removed herself from Jérôme. And it starts off, it's 5 journal entries. The first one is the biggest, and it's the most fervent and the most tortured music of the entire cycle. And then so in the first one she's very upset and pleading with God, give me him because I can't love you. I can't love you, God, without him. And then she calms down a little bit, and it's sort of over the course of 5 songs, she not only calms down, but she starts to lose strength, and she starts to be ill, and at the end she's somehow found a bit of peace, but only in the fact that she knows she's going to die soon. And the very last movement, which has a beautiful piano solo, played by Miori Sugiyama,
Whose house we are in right now.
whose home we are in, who's a phenomenal pianist. And it's the lowest of all the songs. It's the lowest movement of the entire cycle. I sing a G, a low G.
Good luck.
Yeah, thanks. But it sort of ends so beautifully and so quietly, and she's just sort of, it seems like she's just slipping out of the world, not unnoticed, but she's made peace with her situation to an extent, and I think that's my favorite. And he pulls it off with so much finesse, and so it's so elegant.
I think what's great, a great thing about this cycle, it's a very subtle cycle. I think everyone who was involved in this, you, me, and Miori, have said that this is a cycle that really grew on them.
Yes.
That you listen to it once, you start learning it, and you're kind of like,
Yeah.
it's long and it's in French. But it is, and it's because there are subtle things like that that aren't immediately clear like that. And I think what is really great of it is it's a long, the form of it is not really like standard musical form dictated by musical, sonata allegro
Yep.
form, or even your ABA, or some kind of song form, or verses and chord, whatever. It's really the form of it is dictated by the psychology, right? And so when we first learned that letters
Yeah.
cycle, it seems very fragmented and kind of bizarre, and just sort of like things go in one direction and just randomly change direction.
Yeah.
And
It was also, I mean, the notes aren't on a page. Everything looks really easy. It was really, the first bit was really difficult for me to learn.
It doesn't fit. It's counterintuitive.
Yeah, over and over.
Musically counterintuitive. There's lots of sudden modulations that don't immediately make sense without. But then when you start to look at the text or the psychological reason behind it, they actually make perfect sense.
Of course, yeah.
So things like that, where the form of it, like I remember listening. It does, if you just listen to that end, it just seems like it peters out. It just seems like, it almost seems like Milhaud, I don't know, first listen, it just seems like he kind of ran out of ideas and stopped writing. But then when you understand the psychology of it, someone sort of slowly dying, slowly losing hope, or slowly, that is a musical decision that makes perfect sense. So if anyone is watching this, and when you're listening to it, we urge you to sort of listen to it not with an ear of what you might expect, or what would be sort of the first thing that would immediately draw you in intuitively in music, and try to listen to it more for what it is. I think that's a good way of saying it. Taking it, the directions it going, giving it the benefit of the doubt that Milhaud knew what he was doing. Because when you go with it, I think it's a really effective and interesting and unique piece of music, which we will be performing, or I won't be performing. Kristina will be performing. Brooklyn Arts, the we being Brooklyn Art Song Society, will be performing this Thursday at Bachrach Music. Tickets are available on our website and through Bachrach Music's website. You should definitely check it out. And I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Because we're almost done with our wine. So you should check out BrooklynArtSongSociety.org, or you can like us on Facebook, or our Twitter account is @BrooklynArtSong. Thanks so much for watching. Next episode, I will be joined by the fabulous pianist Jocelyn Dweck, and we will be talking about Louis Duray. So we'll see you then.
Cheers.
Cheers.